Hey, welcome to the Scouting Report, guys. This is the first step to developing your plan, your game plan, and so Dr. Scott and I are going to walk through aspects of the Scouting Report today. A couple things though to help orient you and to make sure that this is a really helpful exercise. The first is, as a reminder, this is how you start the process of building an independent, self-directed, lifelong learner. And really, we define that as a young person who's able to define, plan, execute, and evaluate their own learning, not just in the short term, but for a lifetime. This is our goal. Okay, a quick tip about how this works, or a couple tips about how this works is, the first is that this is all about the learner. When you ask the learner to score these statements, the learner is going to assign a score for themselves. And then the adult learning leader is going to assign a score based upon how they see the learner. All right, so you'll see some discrepancies here, and that's part of the point. But again, once the child rates themselves, now answer it for yourself on how you rate the child. It is absolutely essential that this is a no shame, no blame exercise with your son or daughter. The last thing we want them to do is to feel like they are failing as you're asking these questions. And a lot of these questions are going to be hard for them to answer, or it's going to be really clear that they're not doing it very well. So no shame, no blame. And then the last one is, if you feel uncomfortable with this process, it's okay. It's normal. This is different. These are questions that no education structure ever asks parents. But we are scheduling these regularly scheduled webinars. Some will be recorded, some will be live to help you through this. So we're going to be along for the ride with you guys on this deal. Let us know when you complete the scouting report by sending it to either matt@theeducation.com or scott@theeducationgame.com. Put game on in the subject line, and we will then lead you to the next steps. One final note. In the notes below, there'll be links where you can click on specific questions if you want to jump to those questions. All right, Dr. Scott, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Matt. We'd like everyone to go to the Scouting Report Learner Profile, Section 1A, Learning Context. And as Matt reminded us, the young learner and the learner leader, the child and the parent, should answer each of these questions with 1 being low and 5 being high. What I'm going to try to do, and Matt's going to help me, we're going to give you some coaching tips on what we think you should be thinking about when you score these statements and questions. Now, I would recommend when you're going through this, try to save the conversation regarding a score differential, maybe for another day. What's important right now is to get this scouting report filled out. Whatever the score is, the score is. No blame, no shame, like Matt said. So let's get started. So number 1, I monitor how much I have learned each day. So one of the things that we know about self-directed learners is that they keep track of their learning every day. So that when they're asked a question, so what did you learn today? They don't give answers like, nothing, I can't remember. They have definitive answers to that question because they are keeping track of their learning each day. Mm-hmm. So think about that when you score that, right? Ask your child, how well do you think you monitor what you've learned each day? Let them come up with a number, 1 to 5, and then you score it. So number 2, I know what I want to achieve in terms of learning tomorrow. So another skill of independent learners is that they are able to define their learning goals, both short-term and long-term. Question number 2 has to deal with very short-term learning goals. So just like we ask, what did you learn today for question 1? Question number 2 is really, so what are you going to be working on tomorrow? And so you're going to score that 1 to 5, young learner and learning leader. Good. Anything to add there, Matt?
Nope, let's keep going.
All right. Number 3, I know what I should be learning over the duration of a semester. So this is a long-term goal. But here's what's important. If you have a low score on number two around short-term learning, you're probably going to have a low score on number three, because one of the things that learning research tells us is there are a lot of kids that like to talk about long-term learning goals, but if they haven't established short-term learning goals, they really cannot define, plan, execute, or evaluate long-term learning goals. So just a coaching tip here: focus on the short term and then build to the long term.
Mm-hmm.
Matt,
Yeah,
you
just
got
I will
anything
just
to add?
add, as a parent, I do this with my kids, and we have to build the short-term skills before we can even imagine the long-term. But it comes. So anyway, keep going, Scott. You're doing
That's
great.
right.
Yep.
That's right. Yeah. Uh, Number four,
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy learning. Um, Again, what learning research tells us is that self-directed lifelong learners like most learning. Not all, but most. So if you ask your child this question, and they say, "Yeah, I like to learn such and such and such and such, but I'm not real crazy about learning, you know, whatever." That's okay. All right. No one likes all learning. Most people like, a large chunk of learning, but not all of it. So just keep that in mind when you score that question. Matt,
Keep going. Doing awesome. Awesome. Keep it up.
number five, I enjoy learning at school. Well, that's pretty straightforward. Um, and one of the questions that I would ask after I score that is, so uh, what is it about school that you like learn, like you like to learn there? And pay particular attention, because I'm going to guess that most kids are going to talk about learning with others, learning with their friends, right? And so that's valuable. That's I just think that's a little nuance to that question that you can sort of probe your kid around. Number six, I enjoy learning at home. I'm going to be really interested in looking at this question from your scouting reports, because I don't know whether most young learners define what they do at home as learning. But you ask your kid this question, and sort of the difference between 5 and 6 is going to tell us, sort of their readiness, about learning outside of the school, which self-directed, independent, lifelong learners, they don't really care where they learn.
I'll add pieces
Go
to
ahead.
this too. We had some videos early in the summer about developing a learning hub at home. We'll get into this later during the course. Just the idea that there are ways to create the conditions that the home life, actually, the home environment becomes a space that kids actually see it as a learning environment. So that'll be something we'll cover more in the course.
That's a really good point. Yeah. Let's go on to number seven. I know the things I am curious about. One of the things that we know is that learners are curious human beings. If you're not curious, you're probably not a strong and practiced learner. A good question to sort of get your kid to think about scoring this is, how well do you know what you're curious about? A lot of these questions that are these coaching tips that we're sharing today is nothing more than metacognition, thinking about your thinking. But that's a really good question, I think, to ask your child. Also, ask yourself, how well do you know that your child is a curious person? Okay, let's talk about question 8. I consistently learn about things I'm curious about. So, when you score this question, whether you're the learner or the adult learning leader, learners find a consistent pace to their learning. This doesn't mean that you learn at a constant pace, only a consistent pace. So this question is talking about consistency, not constant learning. So your kid doesn't have to be learning 24/7. But if they aren't learning something for, let's say, stretches of 3 to 4 days, they're just kind of laying on the couch playing video games, that is not consistent learning. Number 9, I persist in finishing uncompleted study tasks as quickly as possible. So I had a old college professor, and maybe you've heard this term. I had never heard this term before, but he described persistency as stick with itness.
Mm-hmm.
So when you score this question, how well does your child stick with uncompleted tasks? This one actually asks about study tasks. So this is basically an academic question. And then you go ahead and score it based upon how you see your child rate around this idea of stick with itness. Yeah, number 10.
Yep.
I think before I act. One of the things you're going to see in the scouting report and also the game plan is that Matt and I are big believers in planning.
Yeah.
Learners are planners. This doesn't mean that there is no spontaneity to learning, but most learning occurs according to a plan. So if your kid asks you a question, so what do they mean by that, mom or dad? I think before I act. This is a planning question. So you're going to ask them, so how well do you think you plan? And this is going to be a great conversation, I think, because I don't think enough families talk about planning and really what that word means.
Yep.
Matt?
Yep. That this is a no shame, no blame exercise. We probably should say this on every question, Scott. But the worst thing that could happen is your child starts to feel shamed when they think that they're a great planner and you think that they may need some work, which is oftentimes likely to happen because the child doesn't know what they don't know. So
That's
anyway,
right.
just
That's
really
right.
important to make sure that this is an enjoyable exercise and experience.
Yeah, and I guess I should also add, parents, that I agree with what Matt said, but also on the other hand, if your son or daughter scores something and it's a low score, let's don't play the role of trying to pump them up and saying, you know what, you're really not a one, Johnny, or Susie, you're really a four, right? Let's let the young learner score for themselves, and then parents, um, this is the time for you to be a critical friend to your child, and that is if they score low, and you see it as a low score, you score it low. If you see it as a high score, you score it high, and like Matt said, then we move on to the next question. This is not the time to get, in our opinion, to get sort of drugged down into, really deep conversations around every question. Let's just score the document and go through the process of the promise and the plan.
Yep.
Question 11. I listen to understand before speaking back. Some of you remember a thinker named Stephen Covey. And Covey had rules: seek to understand before being understood. This is what this question is about. And that is, does your son or daughter listen to understand before speaking back? And the question to ask them is, how skilled are you at that behavior? 1 being low, 5 being high. Number 12, I am able to consider many options when facing a problem. Well, one of the things that we know about self-directed learners is they come up with multiple options when facing a problem. So another way to ask this question is, how well do you think of options instead of one solution when trying to solve a problem? And you might give an example of a problem in their recent history, and just ask them, how many options did you think about options, to that problem? Um, yeah. Question 13. I think about what I learn on a daily basis. So this kind of goes back to that earlier question in terms of sort of capturing what you're learning. And we talked about this term metacognition, thinking about your thinking. But this is a strong practice of self-directed learners. Do they think about their thinking, not every once in a while, but every day? And so, we'll talk more about this when we get into the game plan. But a good activity around thinking about your thinking is journaling and just having some reflection time during your day. Number 14, I check my work a second and maybe a third time. Another research point to self-directed learners is that they usually are not settled on their first answer. They think about other possible answers before deciding on whatever they're going to submit as their final answer. This is a skill that I think as we move through this course, we're going to try to develop habits around. And remember that term habits, because when we get through a few more questions, we're going to describe where some of these questions have come from. Checking work also connects back to stick with itness. You're not, you're just going to stick with not only problems, but also solutions. Number 15, I like to ask questions. Self-directed learners are inquisitive, so they like to ask clarifying and probing questions. Clarifying questions are very simple yes and no questions. Probing questions go a little deeper into the problem. So you might want to break that statement down, parents. I like to ask questions. That's kind of a general question. So if you want to break it down, just start talking with your son or daughter about clarifying and probing questions. 16, I like to use what I've learned in everyday situations. Independent learners like to apply their learning to many different situations, and they like it when that application occurs. Conversations like, hey, I learned something last week and I was reminded of it today when I was listening to this podcast, right? Or I'm working on this project and I learned something back a month ago that I'm going to use inside of the project. These are all stories that you might want to share with your son or daughter as you're scoring this question. Okay, Matt. So we've told everyone this is a beta project for us. 17 has a typo.
Yep.
So what we'd like to, and you put this together, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is all your fault. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. 17 should read, I like to communicate in oral form.
Mm-hmm.
So just take a marker and draw a line through writing and in that question. This question is pretty straightforward. How well does your son or daughter like to speak and engage in conversation? To peers, to adults, to friends, to strangers. That's how we want you to think about that question. Number 18, I like to use information to make decisions. Lifelong learners make decisions based on facts, and they know how to gather facts on both sides of what needs to be decided. In this day and age, Matt, I don't think there is a more important question than teaching young people how to use information.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Number 19, I like to create new ways of doing things. Independent learners like to find new pathways toward their learning goals. They aren't interested in following the same map all the time. And again, 19 is like an essential part of the education game's work.
Absolutely.
Because these places called schools, they haven't always been this way, but I saw throughout my career schools and teachers sort of moving away from teaching kids how to do things in new ways based upon the pressures that those teachers felt around standardized testing. Number 20, I like to be known as a curious person. Lifelong learners are known as curious people. They like to ask questions to different people. But curiosity is one of those behaviors that we are going to try to develop in your young learner. I like to solve problems. Lifelong learners understand that there are problem solvers and there are problem makers in the world. They like to be the former most of the time. Sort of like John Lewis saying, there's nothing wrong with getting into good trouble. So, just because you're a problem solver doesn't mean that you're not ready to make some problems or make some trouble, throughout your lifetime. But this is, problems are all over the board, right? So, when you score this, think a little broadly beyond, let's say, mathematics. Maybe they like to solve puzzles. Maybe they like to solve scientific problems, social problems.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what question 21 is about. 22, I like to try new things. Independent learners are open to different. Not only are they open to different, they like to embrace different. So, So talk about how your son or daughter enjoys experiencing different. 23, I like to laugh. Well, so sometimes Matt and I get a little serious about this work. But one of the things that we know is self-directed learners like to have fun while they are learning, even when they are struggling. And I'm going to tell just a 30-second story about this. So Joanne was a student of mine in AP European History. And it was during the AP test. And I was monitoring the test. And I saw Joanne smiling as she was taking the AP test. And I thought, oh my God, because I knew the questions. The questions were so hard. And everyone else had serious looks on their faces, the other testers. So after the test, I went up to Joanne and I said, Joanne, I said, why were you smiling during the test? And she looked at me and she said, Dr. Van Beck, I was having so much fun. I was having so much fun. It was such an enjoyment to take that test. I was almost giggling. So self-directed learners, they like to laugh, they like to have fun, so just keep that in mind when you're scoring the question. Be like Joanne.
Yeah.
24, I like to work with others. So lifelong learners can learn on their own, but they really like it best when they are learning with others. And so that's what 24 is all about. 25, I like to be known as a learner. There is a desired status to be known as a self directed learner, much like star athletes or an expert fine arts performer. There is a status to that. Now, oftentimes that status is not recognized inside of these places called school, because Matt and I would argue that schools reward things like being good on tests, getting good grades. You notice that none of these questions revolve around tests or grades.
Right.
So one
On
of the
purpose.
things that on purpose,
Mm-hmm.
because what the research tells us is that has nothing to do with being a self-directed learner. Now is a good point to tell all of our audience that question 9 through 25 are all connected with research called habits of the mind. So Art Costa and Ben Akalik started this research, 25, 30 years ago. And it was all around self directed learning. A lot of this has to do with academic character, but they have done uh, a lot of research, written a lot of books. And so there are 16 habits of mind. And as we get into this work, Matt and I are going to share more information about those habits of mind. But the question 9 through 25 are correlated to those 16 habits. Let's go on to question 26.
Mm-hmm.
This is a motivation question. I am motivated to become a lifelong learner. So there is an old saying: dissatisfaction leads to motivation, and motivation leads to satisfaction. So, are you going to feel satisfaction as a lifelong learner? If you are, um, we need to find some dissatisfaction first to sort of let motivation kick in. And so once we score these questions, then we're going to help you fill out dials moving forward. And it's really the dissatisfaction of what we're going to see on some of these dials that hopefully is going to lead not only the learner, but also the adult learning leader to be motivated to change some of those dials for the better to produce a self-directed learner.
Yep.
27, I read well. So let's talk about this a bit. So if you were going to score this in school, what school people would talk about is, are you reading on grade level? I guess that's a way to score it. Um, I think you should probably score it based upon the following statement. I possess the skill to read and understand the written word. I'm not so concerned about what level your child reads on right now. The fact of the matter is, most kids read below grade level just a bit early on until they catch up. I'm thinking about more of the mechanics of reading, no matter the age. 28. I write well. Here, I think what we're after uh, is your child, and of course, all of this is age appropriate. Are they able to write an essay sort of exploring a number of different styles. So if they're younger, these are probably just letters. You might start working into creative writing a bit. You might start working into persuasive writing as they're writing, to, an email to their grandma or whatever, trying to talk them into doing something. These are all skills that can help younger kids learn to write well. The older kids, I think what we'd be after is are they able to write, let's say, a 5 paragraph essay, and again using some of those different styles, whether they be creative, persuasive, or even for the older kids, some technical writing. Number 29, I communicate orally well. I can give. I think folks that communicate orally well, the sort of the gold standard is, could your son or daughter give a 3 to 5 minute speech to an audience? I don't really care who the audience is, but would they feel comfortable doing something like that? Number 30, I solve math problems well. Well, I think what we're after here when you score 1 to 5 is, again, depending upon the age of your child, um, are they starting or can they solve problems using basic mathematical reasoning? So we're not talking about calculus here. We're just talking about the mathematical orders, the mathematical reasonings. Um, and, like I said, no blame, no shame, or we said no blame, no shame. Score these as well as you can, because, really, we're trying to capture your current reality. 31, I enjoy solving scientific problems. Um, so again, this of course is an age appropriate question, um, but be thinking about, does your son or daughter like to form sort of ideas around what might happen in the world, and then research what other people think might happen? Do they like to look for evidence of what is happening? And then do they like to arrive at conclusions based upon that evidence? So again, if you haven't practiced any of this, this is what the education game is here for. And of course, we're going to be helping you.
Right.
32, I like learning about the world and its people. So this question is a social studies question. Does your kid like to study history? Do they like to talk about the political situations of the world, and the societies of the world, both present and past? Now, again, if you're scoring this for a 5-year-old, what we want you to think about is, do they like to talk about their grandpa and grandma and where they live, and do they like to talk about the next door neighbors, and mommy, do you know that person wasn't born here, they were born in a place called Ukraine? All of that is demonstration of liking to learn about the world and its people.
Yep.
So again, this is an age appropriate question. And then number 33, I like solving blank problems. So this is a wild card question. Feel free to fill in the blank, and then score according to the passion of the learner, and how the learning leader, that's you, parent, scores that passion, assigned to the son or daughter's passion. Okay, let's go on to section 1B. This is a section around planning. So there's 5 questions that we'd like you to score 1 to 5. And then number 6 is a short answer. So the first one, I regularly make short, medium, and long-term plans for my life.
Mm-hmm.
So independent learners, we've talked about this, they're planners. This might be a repetitive question from something above around the learner profile, but let's just go ahead and score it and talk about it anyway. Short term to me means a couple of days to a week. Midterm might mean a week or two. Long term, again, depending upon the age of the kid, probably means a month or so.
Yeah.
Um, as kids get older, these short term, midterm, and long term goals can be a bit longer in length.
That's right.
You sure wouldn't want someone to think that a long term goal of applying to medical school was defined as a month or so.
Right.
You have to start like way earlier uh, on that. Number two, I am able to set reasonable goals. So as we move through this process, Matt and I are going to define goals as SMART goals. So when you score this, think about words like strategic. Strategic means, does the goal matter? Does it matter to you? Does it matter to the learner? Does it matter to other people? Does it matter? Is it measurable? Has to have some measurement to the goal, or it's not a goal. Is it attainable? For an example, you know, uh, a kid has a vision or a goal of making it to medical school, and they're 7 years old. Well, yeah, that's attainable. The kid is 18 and has dropped out of school. Is medical school attainable? Yeah, maybe, but not as attainable. I would argue as maybe the former example.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Results driven. So SMART goals should always have results, and that goes back to strategic. So the S and R are really sort of they have a relationship. And then last but not least, they're time bound. So we're not after SMAR goals. We're after SMART goals. This is the biggest problem with a lot of us, and that is we never set time restrictions
Mm-hmm.
on goals. Number three, I am comfortable developing plans to achieve my goals. Goals should be broken down into smaller parts, a sequence that leads to the goal. Are you comfortable with that type of process? So it's not just setting a goal, but this question basically says, do you develop plans to achieve the goal? This gets to that defining, planning, executing, evaluating.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Number four, I effectively implement my plans to achieve my goals. Think of the word execution here. How well do you follow through on your plans? And then five, I often evaluate my progress toward my goals. Now, the key word here is often. Think about words when you're scoring this, like met, approaching, developing, starting, when evaluating your goals. A lot of times we talk about, oh, I have goals, or I didn't meet my goals, and we don't break that process down enough, right? So you might just be starting on a goal, or you're developing your pathway to the goal, or you might be approaching the goal. And then, of course, the big desire is you've met a goal.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then number six, are there specific things that you, the learning leader and the learner, want to learn? So actually, this question number 6 is the beginning of the game plan.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's go to section 2. So section 2 tries to capture your son or daughter's current learning. And these, I think, are all short answer questions. So the first question is, how does your child currently use their learning time? And so to break that question down a bit, here are a couple of questions to think about. Is there an established schedule outlining learning time? And if there is, please describe what that schedule currently looks like. Now, again, no blame, no shame. If the current schedule is, my son gets up at 7 o'clock and he walks to school and he goes to school and then he comes back at 3 o'clock and he does his homework. That's fine to start. What I think Matt and I are going to be after moving forward is just a bit more detail to scheduling and outlining learning time, whether it's in school or out of school. Matt?
Again, now we're starting to get in, because we're talking about current learning, we're really getting into the family structure as well, and how does the home operate. So these descriptions would be helpful for the child as well as for the parent to realize that there may be some gaps here. Scott, what do we want to talk about in terms of how do they answer this with their son or daughter?
Well, you're going to ask this question, son, daughter, how do you use your learning time? And I'm guessing the answer is, well, I go to school. Mm-hmm. So in the educational business, we call this extension of the original answer. So parents, that's an answer. But what we want you to do is clarify and probe and try to get your son or daughter to extend that answer. So maybe a follow-up question would be, so that's not like all you learn is at school.
Right.
So
right.
What are some other learning activities that you participate in after school?
Right.
Well, I go to soccer. Yeah. So what do you learn at, what do you learn at soccer? Mm-hmm. Well, I learn how to play soccer. Is that all you do? Learn how to play soccer? Well, I learned teamwork.
Right.
My coach was talking about the importance of working as a team, right? So this is how you're going to capture and start building a schedule around learning. And I think Matt would agree with this. There are a couple of crucial pieces to this scouting report. This is a crucial piece, the learning schedule. Mm-hmm. And when this thing starts cranking, not to say that the schedule is set in stone. The schedule is always adjusted, but you got to have a schedule, right, Matt?
That's right. That's right.
Question 2, what is your child reading? We just want to know what your child is reading, literally write down the titles of the books or the graphic novels. If they're not reading, just write down they're not currently reading, or they're reading in school. There's a lot of kids that practice reading in school that don't practice reading out of school. I came into contact with a lot of those kids when I was inside of the school district. Yeah. Number 3, if your child is writing, what do they write about? Right? So do they like to write stories? Do they like to write letters? Do they really like to text? Yeah. Keep writing short. They're into social media. What type of writing are they doing? And then, if you have a writing sample, Matt and I would sure like to see that. You can submit it when you submit the scouting report. So number four, what type of problem solving activities is your child involved in? So problem solving can be like puzzles, games, video games. We just want to know what types of problem solving activities your child's brain is involved with, currently.
Mm-hmm.
Number five, what activities is your child involved in that you would consider character building? So, what kind of do they do chores? Do they have a job? Are they into community service? Do they like to participate in faith-based activities?
Boy
What are
Scouts, Girl
yeah,
Scouts,
Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts?
volunteerism.
That's right. That's
Mm-hmm.
right. All of those would be good examples of character building. If the answer is, well, they're not really involved in any of that, um, and you want to move forward, you can almost guess what Matt and my feedback is going to be when we start building the game plan. And that is, if you don't have answers to some of these, again, no blame, no shame at this point, but we're going to be pushing you hard to start building in these types of activities into go back to question one, into your learning schedule, or your child's learning schedule.
Right.
Number six, what interferes with their learning? So when answering this, think about social factors. So I remember there were a bunch of middle school age kids that had really good grades, through elementary, and then they just kind of bottomed out. And not to say that the grade represented the learning, but they really stopped being practicing learners. And that's because they got caught up with a peer group that didn't value that. And they kind of got convinced that learning wasn't cool. That happens all the time. So if it's happening, just call it the way it is, and we'll work to fix it.
Yep.
School factors. What maybe they have bad teachers. So I hate to say this, but when I was in the school business, um, if there were 7 teachers in a student schedule, probably one, hoping not 2, but sometimes 2, they just wouldn't be very good teachers. That can interfere
Sure.
with learning big time.
The students in the
And then,
classroom as well,
oh yeah,
right?
student distractions.
Right.
Yeah. It goes back to that social factor.
Right. Right.
And then unmanaged distractions. Video games, playing video games for 8 hours a day, being on social media until 2:30 in the morning. Not only are these unmanaged distractions, but there's pretty good research out that it's just plain unhealthy.
Right. And again, another area where we're going to have some specific conversations in the future around social media and video games and screens generally. So,
Yeah. But again, like if the case is your kid's on the couch, that's not a matter not to send in the scouting report.
yeah, that's what it
Don't
is.
like, it is what it is. Don't be embarrassed about it. Matt and I are here to help you fix that. Section 3, assessing learning. How do you know your child is learning currently? I'm probably going to give you the answers that you're going to write down here, because they are pretty much run of the mill: grades, standardized tests, attendance percentage, teacher comments. So you can write down those answers. Maybe you have other answers, but if your kid is in school, my experience is, for an example, I would be amazed if you have your kid in school that the answer to question number one is a portfolio or project-based instruction, like total project-based instruction. Number two, how much of their learning includes topics of authentic interest to your child? So this is a really important question. What we're asking here is assessing how much time the learner has in their day to explore their passions. Again, I'm going to read that one more time. Assess how much time the learner has in their day to explore their passions.
Can I just tell you, Scott, from my thoroughly unscientific questioning of, dozens, maybe hundreds of parents at this point, the answer is usually around 10%. At most.
Yeah.
At most, I should say.
Yeah.
That's terrible. So that's a whole, again, more conversation.
Yeah.
These are all leading us to a place, y'all. Remember, these questions are leading us to the plan to start to fix these things. So,
and no one said anyone's current reality is a good place to be, right? Sure. So we're once we capture this, then the whole process is moving forward, right? Improvement. Continuous improvement, in fact. Number three, what are the other possible evaluation techniques that could fit your child? Wow, what a great question. So,
but a hard one for a lot of parents, Scott.
Oh, hard one. But here's some ideas. So, all of that, when I talked about portfolios and project-based instruction not happening enough in schools, this might be the answer to question three. And project-based instruction is building skills around projects. And when you go into professional environments, that's really how attorneys, doctors, accountants,
everything
operate, right? They use their skills to produce projects,
sure,
and advanced projects. Portfolios are nothing more than a collection of work. Well done portfolios, they really embarrass traditional assessment practices like tests.
That's right.
Yeah. Some other ideas to share with your child: interviews. Just asking a set of Socratic questions. Socratic questions are questions that you're going to pose to your children to allow them to answer with a plan, right, to get to an outcome, and then videos. And Matt does a lot of work with videos in terms of his kids. Parents, here's a coaching tip for section 4. If I was filling this out with one of my children, I would try to focus more on the positives. We want to capture what is happening if they're not meeting expectations. Whether it's what the school is doing, how the school is reporting, how your child is reacting. But let's at least try to balance the positive with sort of the negative through this section, or else we're going to violate the no blame, no shame.
Can I also, Scott, say that on the side of the families whose kids are meeting expectations, many times those expectations are very low standards. So if your child is meeting a low standard expectation, that's really not necessarily a place to celebrate. It's a place to go, all right, well, maybe the expectation needs some adjustment. So to Scott's point, we do not want this to be a negative conversation. But at the same time, if your child is meeting all expectations, don't assume that that necessarily means your child's doing great. Would you agree with that, Scott?
I would.
Okay.
I guess my point here, Matt, is just okay. So these are going to be like really um, impactful conversations. But you, as the adult learning leader, um, you just have to be careful with these four questions. Um, um, yeah, I think that's all I'm going to say. Parents, you know your kids better than I do. This, I think, Section 4 is probably the most sensitive part of the scouting report. So just keep that in mind.
Good.
Okay, let's go to Section 4. Almost finished.
Yep.
Um, what does the school do if your child is or is not meeting expectations? Well, so if they are meeting expectations, here's a question to ponder. Is your child allowed to move on with their learning, or are they expected to sit and wait for their classmates? If they aren't meeting expectations, think about the following. Does the school ask for a conference? Does your child receive a failing grade? Is there, like, I hate to say this, but I know it happens. Is there shaming of the child? Are there restrictions put on the child? Are there punishments meted out toward the child?
Can I
Yeah,
jump in
go
real
ahead.
quick on that one? So,
Yeah.
this question of meeting expectations should be much more like how you interact with your physician at your child's pediatrician. There's very little shaming that happens when there is a bad test result in a medical environment. In fact, usually it's no shaming. It's really like, okay, we got a problem. How are we going to deal with this? So if these things are shaming, we want to make sure we do not reinforce it as we're asking these questions to your child. This is purely and simply helping to understand the circumstance so we can diagnose it and then develop a plan to deal with it.
Good point. This section around intervening for either successful learning or non-successful learning really emphasizes the no blame, no shame piece.
Yep.
For sure. Number 2, what do you do if the school reports your child is or is not meeting expectations? If the learner is meeting expectations, do you get any additional feedback beyond a periodic report card? If the learner is not meeting expectations, think about the feelings of bad report cards, assignment of failure, and sort of assignment to the learner of not caring.
Scott, that's not
Number
clear to me.
3,
What do you mean by that? Assignment of not caring?
the assignment of not caring toward the learner.
Gotcha.
Well, you're not trying because you just don't care.
I see. Got it.
Right.
Again, that's back to shaming, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the wrong coaching question. The right coaching question is, so what do you care about?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me what you care about right now. And then you can start entering into the conversation of what they seem to be not caring about.
Yeah. Okay.
But oftentimes we just go straight to, oh, you don't care enough.
Right.
Number 3, how does your child react when they feel that they are or are not meeting expectations? If they are meeting expectations, are they ready to move on with their own learning, or are they more interested in staying with the pack? If they aren't meeting expectations, does your learner show low self-esteem, hatred of the subject, severe disengagement, and I hate to say, with older ages, desire to drop out? I'm going to talk about a way to look at questions 1 through 4. What should happen when your child does or does not learn something? If they do learn something, is there a celebration? If they don't learn something, is there a plan for extra time, extra support, or another type of learning adjustment? Okay, Matt,
Oh,
that's it.
that's it. All right. So, as a reminder, this is the beginning steps for developing of a plan. Uh, if you complete as you complete this document, you will hear more from us around next steps. Thanks for listening. Thanks to Dr. Scott for walking us through the scouting report, and more to come from the education game as we help you help make your child into a lifelong learner. Take care.